The prairie stretched wide beneath a merciless sky, the kind of sky that seemed to press the earth down into silence. Dust lay thick over the road, curling in faint ghosts around the hooves of Elias Boone's horse as he rode into town. He rode not with pride or purpose, but with a hollow weight of need. His ranch had been thinning out like old rope, cattle dropping from thirst, cupboards echoing with nothing but wind, his one strong name shriveling into pity on the lips of neighbors. A man could starve slower than his herd, but the shame of asking for help killed quicker. He wasn't riding for whiskey or tobacco, the usual salves for a lonely man. He was riding for milk. Milk! For bread dough he could stretch another day, for the ache in his stomach that had turned sharp. Milk, humble as a prayer, desperate as a sin. The town was awake but brittle, shutters banging against houses, voices clipped like they were afraid to weigh sound. At the store, women lingered with baskets at their feet, trading not goods but whispers. Elias caught his own name in the tangle of their voices, half pity, half mockery. Boone's down to bone and dust. A man ought to sell if he can't feed his herd. And then, sharper still, Widower Boone, scraping by, not fit for company, not fit for pride. He lowered his hat brim and kept riding, each word latching onto his back like burrs. He couldn't walk into that store and lay his last coins on the counter. He wouldn't hand Mrs. McCrae, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, the satisfaction of seeing him beg. He turned his horse down a side track, intending to ride the long road home, thirst gnawing at him. That was when he saw her. Clara May Hollis stood outside the crooked porch of her cabin, a jar of milk in her hands, sunlight striking her hair into copper flame. She was thinner than he remembered, her dress faded, but her posture unbowed. The town had cast her off years ago, after her fiancé fled and left her with nothing but disgrace, and gossip had turned her name into a cautionary tale. Clara May, they called in whispers, spoiled goods, lonely as a weed. She had lived on the edge of town since, in the cabin her father built before he drank himself into the grave. Elias hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the last cattle drive when she'd passed him on the road and nodded without words. Now she looked at him with that same quiet, steady gaze, and then down to the jar she carried. He didn't ask, didn't speak, but she stepped down the porch and held it out. The milk was warm from the morning cow, froth still clinging at the rim. Elias shook his head, pride pulling his shoulders tight. She didn't lower the jar. The silence pressed between them, heavy as the heat, until his horse shifted restlessly, and his stomach growled loud enough to betray him. Clara's mouth curved, not into a smile but something softer, understanding or perhaps defiance. She set the jar into his hand without a word. His fingers closed around it, rough and reluctant. Their skin didn't touch, not quite, but he felt it all the same, a current, dangerous and undeniable. He muttered thanks, low as gravel, and rode on, the weight of the jar pulling at him like a stone. He hadn't asked, but she had given. And already he knew the town would not forgive either of them. By evening the whispers had spread, slick as oil over water. Elias Boone had been seen at Clara May's place, seen with her milk in hand, seen lingering too long for a man who claimed no interest in scandal. At the saloon, men chuckled into their cups. Boone's ranch may be starving, but his nights won't be cold. Sheriff Dalton Graves stopped him on the boardwalk, his badge glinting in the dusk. "Careful who you're seen with, Boone," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with the authority of a man who policed morals as much as laws. A man's name can rot quicker than beef left in the sun. Elias tipped his hat, said nothing, but shame burned his chest. He went home to silence, the jar empty but his mind full. Clara May's face lingered when he closed his eyes, not the shape of her lips or the curve of her dress, though he had noticed those, but the way she had stood, unflinching, when he would have withered. The next day, and the next after, he told himself he would not ride that way again. Pride demanded distance, demanded that he starve if he must. But loneliness is a beast stronger than hunger, and on the third evening, when the sky bled red across the hills, Elias found himself at her porch again. Clara was mending a dress in the fading light. She looked up, saw him, and without a word pushed another jar toward him. He dismounted but did not take it. Instead, he sat in the weathered chair by her door, the wood creaking under his weight. She returned to her stitching, needle flashing in and out, the only sound besides a sigh of prairie wind. They said nothing. They didn't need to. In the hush of that hour, silence felt less like loneliness and more like a language of its own. When rain came 2 nights later, sudden and hard, Elias was caught at her place again. Clara lit a lantern in a cabin filled with gold light, shadows soft against her cheekbones. The roof rattled with storm, and the smell of wet earth bled through the windows. He sat at her small table, dripping water from his coat, while she poured coffee thick as tar. Their shoulders brushed when she set the cup down. He stilled, the contact burning like fire, though she seemed not to notice. Or perhaps she noticed too well. He saw the pulse at her throat, quick and certain. They drank in silence, the storm closing them into a world of two. It wasn't lust that struck him, not first. It was the terror of realizing how badly he wanted to be near her, to sit in her silence, to be seen, not as failure or scandal, but simply as a man. By the time the storm eased, his chest ached with longing heavier than hunger. Yet when he left, leading his horse through mud, his shame returned. He knew the town's tongue would shred him for it, that whispers already circled like vultures. Clara May was ruined, they'd say, and he was fool enough to share in it. Rumors thickened like storm clouds. "She's snaring Boone," Mrs. McCrae declared at the store. "Can't blame him. Man's got nothing left to lose." Elias heard it all, every sneer disguised as jest. His pride flared into anger, and he went to Clara's porch with fury he didn't know how to contain. "Why do you do it?" he demanded, rain still dripping from his hat brim. "Why give when you know what they'll say? You think I need your pity?" His voice cracked like a whip, harsher than he meant. Clara's eyes glistened in the lantern light, but she didn't flinch. "I didn't offer pity, Elias," she said, her voice quiet but sharp as glass. "I offered what I had left to give, and I'd do it again." Shame broke him then, shame not of her, but of himself. He sank into the chair, head in his hands, the silence between them raw and trembling. Clara stepped close. He felt her presence before he lifted his gaze. She didn't reach for him, didn't speak again. She only took his hand, slow and deliberate, and pressed it against her heart. Beneath his calloused palm, he felt the steady thrum of her pulse, human and fragile. The world narrowed to that rhythm. The storm outside, the warmth of her chest under his hand. He should have pulled away, but he didn't, couldn't. Loneliness roared inside him, louder than shame. He let it carry him into her arms. They shared no declarations, no promises, only the quiet surrender of bodies long starved of tenderness. It wasn't fire that consumed them, but a kind of fragile grace, as though the night itself hushed to witness. For the first time in years, Elias Boone was not alone. For the first time since disgrace, Clara May was wanted. Morning came clear and still, the prairie washed clean by rain. Elias saddled his horse, boots sinking in damp earth. Clara wrapped bread in cloth, tucked it beside a fresh jar of milk, and placed it in his saddlebag. She didn't ask him to stay. He didn't promise to return. Their silence held more than words could. He looked at her once before mounting, her hair loose in the wind, her eyes unguarded, and knew that something in him had shifted. Shame had loosened its grip. Loneliness had met its match. He rode back toward town, the weight of bread and milk heavier than gold. Already he could hear whispers waiting for him, but he no longer felt bowed by them. His stride would be different now, his silence filled with something the town could never name. Clara had given him more than milk. She had given him a reason to endure. And yet, as he neared the ridge, a figure stirred by the roadside. Sheriff Dalton, arms folded, eyes sharp as rifle sights, watching him approach. Elias slowed, heart pounding, because he knew before a word was spoken that the sheriff had seen the bread, the milk, the softened man in the saddle, seen enough to turn whispers into weapons. And in that moment, Elias understood what had begun with milk would not end quietly.